Cheers.
Cheers. Welcome to Culture Night,
where each week we drink fancy wine and watch movies that are in some way culturally significant. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Sarah. And we want to say thank you to everybody that's listening on all the podcast platforms, Apple Music, Apple Podcasts,
there you go.
Spotify, all the
Stitcher,
places.
Probably. I don't know if people use that. Pocket Casts, all those ones.
All the things. And to anybody that is watching us on YouTube. And thank you to any of our new subscribers. There's maybe 3 of you from last week. So thank you.
All right. We're growing, going viral.
Yep. And we're here for episode 6.
Oh, man. Start with some quick podcast business. Obviously, I think the big thing is get some new equipment.
Yeah, hopefully if you're just listening, you can tell that we sound much better than previous weeks.
Hopefully we sound much better. This is our first time really recording with these. We still have the fallback to our video mic in case this somehow goes awry. But do you want to christen the Rodecaster? Pull off the...
Are you sure you want me to take the plastic off?
Yeah, can't go back now. Ooh.
Just pull the plastic cover off of the Rodecaster. So the turnaround time on starting this podcast was about a week. We kind of decided, it all came together really quickly, and we decided that we really just needed to press play. We used what we had. We have a Sony a6300 camera and a Rode video mic.
Yeah, the video mic Go To, I think is what it's called.
Gotcha. And so we just plugged all that in and used what we had to get us started. And then we're having a lot of fun doing this. So we decided to invest a little bit. And we now each have our own Rode pod mic. So hopefully we sound very beautiful. And then we also bought the Rodecaster Pro so that we
stands.
Stands to hold up our mics. And I'm still learning the Rodecaster Pro. It is very plug and go for the most part, but we're also trying to get set up and find out where the microphone's supposed to go and where's the best place to have all the equipment and stuff. But
yeah, hopefully it's not, we're not like, doesn't sound weird. Like hopefully it comes fairly well tuned, and we don't have any pop filters, but I think this supposedly has pop filters built into it. So we shouldn't really need that.
So we will hopefully get more comfortable with all the equipment, especially like all the buttons and everything on this as we get going. But we're excited for this podcast because hopefully it'll sound beautiful.
Yep. And so the next podcast business is actually not going to happen, but I was thinking earlier about it's, March Madness. And I was like, eventually, hopefully like in a year, we'll have enough movies to do like our own bracket to, kind of have like, I've actually put a little bit of thought into this. Seed them by like the amount of money they grossed.
Ooh.
Adjusted for inflation. Because obviously it'd be kind of weird not to.
For sure.
I think that would be very interesting to see, like, based on how much money they made, which ones we would then choose, of like which one we just subjectively liked more.
I'm loving this.
6 movies. I mean, we technically have a couple more because we watched a couple movies for our own culture night before we started the podcast. But I figured that sample size of 6 wouldn't be very exciting.
Yeah. But I mean, a year from now, we'll have 50...
Yeah, 52
58.
Plus that, yeah.
And the 6 we've already done plus a year from right now would be close to 60.
Almost have a full 64.
So maybe we'll pull a couple in from our bracket, or maybe we'll do some double features sometime over the next year. Who knows? But hopefully we can have enough
episodes.
Yeah. Oh, that'd be super fun. I love that. Love that.
So yeah, maybe next year for March Madness we can have a little bit of fun.
Yeah, make a note, put a reminder somewhere so we remember. All right, so now jump into our slept on it segment, kind of jumping back into the jerk from last week. I will get us started. So we obviously talked a lot about Steve Martin because he was the star of the show, and just you looked up during the movie that he was 34 when they shot this.
I think that was right. Yeah.
So I did a little bit of a deep dive on Steve Martin just to learn a little bit more about when it was in his career, because we did mention that he seemed a little stiff in certain parts, or that his acting was not what we know it is to be today. And so here's a little bit about Steve Martin. He started as a writer in late night comedy and actually won an Emmy Award with the whole writing staff of the late night show that he worked for, which was called Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. And that was in 1969. And he was only 23 years old when he won his first Emmy.
Wow.
I don't know if he's won more than that. I probably should have looked at that.
Does that predate SNL then? Wasn't SNL, didn't that start in the 70s?
I believe so. Yeah. Wow. So he just casually started off his career with an Emmy.
Yeah, that's crazy.
We should have known then that he
Yeah.
would be a superstar. He did a lot with stand-up comedy and also continuing to do stand-up comedy routines on all the late night shows and things like that. And we were correct in that The Jerk was one of his first films. It was the 6th film that he was in, including 2 of the films before that. One he just had a cameo appearance in, and one of them was a documentary where he was himself. So it was really his 4th major movie. Actually, one of them was only a short film. So he was still very fresh in the acting business, and he was also a writer on The Jerk. So he helped write the movie as well as start in it.
It seemed very much kind of like something he would have written, especially early on there.
Yeah. So there's obviously a lot more to Steve Martin's career than just that, but that's just kind of a little bit of what got him started and what led him up to where we see him in this movie.
Very cool.
And then the other thing I looked into is we talked about how this movie had a lot of similarities to the movie Elf. And I mean, if we both independently thought of it, I assumed there would be lots of stuff on the internet about how it was super similar, but there was not as much as I thought there was going to be. There was one Sporkle quiz about pick the similarities between The Jerk and Elf. There were 14 of them.
Seems very odd for a quiz.
Yeah, I did take it. I got them all right.
Nice.
But I mean, it was things like main character was mentioned on the news, or like just very like
interesting.
Overarching storylines. And then I did see it referenced in an article where someone was talking about how terrible the movie Elf is, which I do not agree with. Love that movie. But said it had a lot of comparisons to The Jerk, and The Jerk was funny according to the writer of this article. And Elf was not. So there might be more if I dug really deep on the internet, but just a quick Google search did not yield the results I thought it would.
Interesting. Yeah, maybe we need to publish an article about this crazy finding.
That's what we'll do. We will take this from podcast
now movie
to
researchers.
Yes. Oh, geez, I don't have time for that.
Interesting. I thought it was fairly obvious too from the way we were watching it that we were like, this so much reminds me of Elf.
Yeah, and so early on in the movie too, I caught on to it that I mean, I think before he even left his home, I was like, oh, this is very similar to Elf. That I am shocked it's not talked about more.
Yeah. So in the movie, when he talks about, or when he starts working at the car wash or whatever, the auto
gas
shop,
station.
Whatever, he's hired for $1.10 per hour, which obviously seems very low. Today, minimum wage is $7.25 nationally, and trying to be pushed up to $15 and making its way up there. But even then, $1.10 was, well, if you adjust for inflation, $1.10 in 1979 is worth $4.82 in today's money, so still very low. And minimum wage in California at the time was $2.65, so it was less than half of minimum wage. So it kind of explains why the attendant was so excited to have him work there for such a low price, basically paying him absolutely nothing.
And really, I think that leads into he's so naive, and he's just excited to have a job and that someone wants to hire him, and he doesn't have a real concept of money and what it is.
I still just assumed it was minimum wage though when he said that, and I was like, obviously our concept of money from decades before we were born is a little bit skewed, but I just assumed that was minimum wage, and the joke was going to be he was so excited to make minimum wage, but even then he wasn't even making minimum wage, which is the comedy.
Poor
there.
guy.
As for the title, so my initial research in trying to find the title, Google very helpfully had the their suggested question of why is it called The Jerk. So I clicked it to expand it, and it took me about a sentence or two to get into it before I realized it was talking about jerk chicken and why it is called jerk chicken. Obviously not at all.
Very different, but very delicious.
But even still, I wasn't really able to find a definitive answer on it. On IMDb, there was a trivia thing about the film's title grew out of conversations between Steve Martin and Carl Reiner. Some of the working titles were Money to Burn, The Jerk, A Wild and Crazy Movie, and Easy Money. So it doesn't seem like there was really much thought put into this.
I mean, we both agreed that The Jerk was not the best title we thought for the movie. Obviously, we are not renowned movie critics.
Yeah. But the entire idea for the movie came from one of Steve Martin's stand-up bits where he just, I guess out of nowhere, just says, it wasn't always easy for me. I grew up a poor black child, which is the opening quote of the movie. So I feel like he basically, that's all he had for an idea. And then I must have pulled from a hat a bunch of like random movie titles or something and just went with it because it doesn't seem like there was too much thought or meaning behind it.
Yeah. I don't know.
It still
doesn't fit.
Yeah. I still don't like Easy Money or Money to Burn.
That really jumps to the end of the movie. I feel like it does take a while to get to that point. Maybe Easy Money, I feel like fits better than The Jerk, but I
feel like something like called like Falling Upwards or something might have been like made more sense. I don't know. It just didn't love The Jerk, but don't really have much better to offer. So another trivia thing though that I saw on that same page was that, or actually this is on Wikipedia, apparently Bill Murray, they filmed a cameo scene with him, but they ended up cutting it. So would have been interesting.
I was going to say, I saw cameo and I was like, I don't remember seeing him in there, but that makes sense. They cut it. Yeah, it would have been interesting to see what his cameo was.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a deleted scene, if it exists somewhere that we could find or something. But anyways, for a glimpse into the times of 1979, the top 3 movies that year were Superman, The Amityville Horror, and Rocky II. The Jerk came in at number 7 on the list. But what's interesting is, I don't know how accurate this website is, but it says that the Jerk grossed $73 million in 1979, but it was released on December 14th. So either this website's wrong or it made a lot of money in 2 weeks. And I feel like it probably is more the website's wrong.
Yeah, or that it made that much while it was out, not in that year.
Yeah. I think maybe it's saying that.
I don't know how they rank the top grossing movies and what their timeline is for when they cut that money off.
Maybe the 1979 gross there just means like in 1979 dollars or not adjusted for inflation or anything. Anyways, the top 3 songs released that year were My Sharona by The Knack, Bad Girls by Donna Summer, and La Freak by Chic.
I would say Chic.
Chic. I definitely know My Sharona. I definitely know who Donna Summer is, but
I know La Freak too.
Gotcha.
I feel a little more cultured because I've actually heard of these songs. Unlike last week, everything I was like, I've not heard of any of this.
So interesting. That's what was popular at the time. So, anyways, that concludes our Subsonic segment. So, let's move into what are we drinking tonight?
Tonight we are drinking, I believe it's a 2017 Petit Verdot from Tobin James. Yes, Tobin James Silver Reserve Petit Verdot from 2017. I'm quite excited to try this because I'm a big Petit Verdot fan. So
I think I haven't had too many, but the ones I've had I've really enjoyed. I feel like I've only had like 3 or 4 different Petit Verdots.
Yeah, but that one is so good. It's very pungent.
Yeah, I'm not really getting much on the nose there. Again,
I don't know. It kind of smells similar to me like last week. It's got like a sweetness, like a vanilla.
I was going to say raisin again, so similar sweetness, but
and like some dark fruit, not overwhelming tart dark fruit, but just
maybe some plum or something. Let's try it. Oh, I almost got like some cherry Kool-Aid flavor there.
I don't know how
a lot like sweeter. I didn't get much at first, and all of a sudden it was just like boom.
I don't know how much of it is power of persuasion, or I just can't put my finger on what the flavor is until you say it out loud, and then I can taste it. But I can see the Kool-Aid for sure.
Yeah, definitely get some like rich, bright red cherry flavor there.
It's pretty good.
Wish I had more to say about it, but it doesn't feel too complex, but it's
feeling like a pretty solid start. Just like very, I mean, just like it's gonna be good. Nothing overwhelming, but delicious.
Yeah, so we'll see how we feel after 2 glasses of it.
All right, and now what are we watching tonight?
We are watching Young Frankenstein from 1974.
Yeah, I believe it was on the top grossing movies from the year.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, 1974.
Blazing Saddles came out.
Did we look to see what its rating is though? PG-13 or R?
I did not.
While you look that up.
Up there, it looks like it says PG.
Oh, I doubt that can't be true. Can it? Young Frankenstein.
I don't know. We'll see how accurate it is. I kind of think I've seen it before. I'm not 100% certain. Jumping into the next question. I feel like I have maybe like in college for a class or something. I think we learned about the Frankenstein story and all that stuff, but I can't be certain. So we'll see if once it gets started, if it feels familiar, and I can confirm if I've seen it.
It says PG, so shouldn't expect anything too dirty, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like this is going to be a little bit of a hard pivot from the styles of movies we've watched the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Or honestly, the whole time.
Yeah, or maybe PG was just a lot different back in 1974.
Yeah, we'll see.
What
have you seen it before?
I've not seen it before. I've only ever heard about it, but I know almost nothing about it. I guess assume it's like a funny telling of like the story of Frankenstein and Dr. Frankenstein. But it says young, so maybe it predates all that, and it's more about like backstory, origin story, maybe.
Ooh.
But yeah, that's. I know it's got. Oh God, blanking on his name. Gene Wilder. Yeah, I keep wanting to say Gene Hackman. That's not. That's a different person. It's got Gene Wilder in it, and that's. I think there's a character named Igor. Is that Frankenstein's like assistant? I assume that he's in it too as like a. I don't know who the actor is, but character.
Yeah, I feel like you hear of the story of Frankenstein, like of Frankenstein. But I'm not confident in how well I know the story to be really confident in answering any of the things you just asked. And I feel like I've probably seen this movie before, but unlike you, I don't remember every detail of my life all the time and everything I've seen and everything I've read. But
I was pretty hazy on 2 of the movies that I've already seen before. So
yeah,
like the Risky Business, completely forgetting the entire premise of the movie. So
that's
I wouldn't put too much stock in my memory from 10 years ago.
I'm learning so much about you.
Yeah.
I thought you just remembered everything that ever happened. So this is opening up a new side.
As I watch it, but yeah.
Yeah. I am excited to see it again. I mentioned it to my mom and she was excited about how much she loved this movie. And I feel like you mentioned a couple people that you've said that really loved this movie. So I hope it lives up to the hype.
Yeah.
And it was one of the top grossing movies in 1974 based on our deep dive a couple weeks ago, right?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many movies came out per year that were really tracked back then, but it was definitely one of the top movies then. So
yeah. All right.
Let's jump in.
Young Frankenstein.
Let's do this.
All right.
Cheers.
Cheers to Young Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Whoop.
I
guess
it was long.
It really wasn't that long. It was an hour and 36 minutes.
It felt really slow.
We've had a week, and last night we stayed up late.
Yeah.
So we're just really tired is the only problem. It was not that long of a movie. We always do this.
Yeah.
Wine.
Hour and 46 minutes. Hang on. Hour and 46 minutes I feel like it's pretty long for a comedy. I feel like
You're
comedies
right.
are usually a little under an hour and a half.
Hour and 46 minutes. I said hour and 36 minutes. My math's off because I'm so tired.
It felt long. And I think also, we'll get to this in a minute.
Yeah, I know. That's what I was saying. Stop. Okay. But we just got a wine scale. Right. So remember, our wine scale is like good wines. It's not like the worst wine you ever had to the best wine you ever had. It's a little bit more of a condensed scale. So what's your wine rating? And just as a reminder, it's the 2017 Tobin James Silver Reserve Petit Verdot.
I give it a 5.3.
Well, we're good. I had it as a 5.2. I had to double check to make sure. I wrote it down.
It's not that it was like, it's not that it was a bad wine. I think it doesn't help that I've had some really good Petit Verdots. That to me, it just felt kind of underwhelming.
And I think we're also like, this is episode 6. So 6 weeks in a row, we've opened very nice bottles of wine and we've had a lot of like really good wine recently, as opposed to just drinking like run of the mill grocery store wine.
Had like, a lot of complexity. And this one,
and last week's was really good.
There wasn't too much. But I feel like a 5.3, like it was, it was good. Obviously our scale, like a 0 is still like a nice wine. The way that it's weighted. I'm not going to like go back to the store and get it again.
It's not something that's going to stick out to me that I'm going to remember for a long time. But, and like you said, we've had some Petit Verdots that just really have knocked it out of the park.
I feel like I've had some Petit Verdots that Petit Verdot's that like approach the 9+, like on the
Oh, for sure.
that have been like, that's kind of almost why this feels like it gets docked more than if this was just like a Cab Sav.
But I will also give it like a 5.2 with an asterisk, in that I don't know how long we've actually had this wine and how well this particular bottle was kept, that I don't know if it was just because we didn't age it correctly.
Yeah, but I didn't feel like it went bad. It didn't like taste like it was like soured. It just felt like, and like, I don't know how wines like.
I'm just saying, like, it might have been a good wine in 2017 when it came out. We are not the best. We've been, for the last like couple of years, we've kept all of our wines as soon as we get them straight to the basement. But there was a while where we were storing them upstairs.
They're pretty consistent temperature year round, like deep in the, practically like into.
We've gotten better
into a cave in our basement. It
was it was nothing over the top, and especially I think it's also hard coming off where last week was really good. That
now, if Tobin James wanted to sponsor us, then I would say that's definitely a 10 out of 10, the best wine that I've ever had.
We do really love you, Tobin James, and we are anxiously awaiting our spring shipment.
Another shipment any day now. I feel like it's going to ship.
Oh my God, stop! I can't wait.
And they posted on Instagram that they're going to be shipping soon. I've not gotten charged, so it's.
I always wait for the credit card charge.
Yeah, but can't wait.
All right.
Just as we've gone through like 10 this year, we'll get another 8 all of a sudden. So we're back where we started.
All right. Movie rating out of 10.
Movie rating out of 10.
Do you want me to go first? Or do you want to say yours first?
You can say yours first.
I gave it a 6.8.
I gave it a 5.1.
I think that's mildly influenced by how tired you are.
No, and honestly, it kind of fluctuated throughout the movie. It started out and I was like, this is not great. It's like a 5 flat or even less. There were some like funny moments. It was decent, but then it just dragged on, and that kind of like ran it down for me. I feel like we need to create a rubric for this of like how we rate these, of like
getting technical over here.
Like I think there's some like quotability, whether it influenced other things, how likely we are to rewatch it, how likely we would be to watch it if it was on, like if we were flipping channels, if we did that anymore. If we were flipping channels and it was on, how likely would we be to continue watching it?
You're giving me real flashbacks to my teaching days of how to actually, I know I learned that there are like criteria for creating a rubric, that you're naming a lot of things that are really taking me back here.
I feel like maybe we should create like some sort of rating system. I do kind of like just the off the cuff subjective rating for this.
I appreciate, especially because this is something that we're doing hopefully long term, of having some kind of rubric and a little bit more reasoning behind our score. But I also feel like there's a lot to be said of like, I just finished this movie or while I was watching it, and this is the number that just sticks out to me.
Yeah.
That maybe like we into our like slept on it portion, pull in more of like a rubric style, like, I thought about it and based on all this criteria, this is my score. But I really like the raw reaction rating.
Raw reaction definitely is a 5.1 for me, and it crept up. At one point I was considering giving it a 6.8, and then it just kept going. I kind of lost like a bit of interest in it a little. It just 5.1, and
I appreciate that. I will say I gave it a 6.8 because I feel like I've laughed the most this week of the comedies that we've watched recently. It had some good jokes. And I think also, having watched Blazing Saddles, Mel Brooks style film, and to have another Mel Brooks film, and knowing at least one other off the top of my head, and just thinking about like really thinking of what his style is and putting more brain power to it besides, I'm watching this movie, haha. I appreciate kind of what he looked for in comedy and how he wrote his stuff. And I'm excited to do a couple of deep dives this week, or more specifically into Mel Brooks and his writing and like what inspired what he even picked to write movies about. And I have a couple of notes that I'll get into later, but
I mean, I didn't make a note of this, but I did think about it during the movie that I think this was one of the first Mel Brooks movies that I've seen where I didn't, allegedly he was in it. He had a role. It said he played, I think Victor Frankenstein. So I don't know who that was, but I feel like most Mel Brooks movies, I see him like playing 3 or 4 different roles, and I didn't really notice him in this movie.
Yeah, I didn't notice him either. But isn't that Frankenstein in this his dad?
It must have been his dad because the grandfather was in the painting, and that was
obviously Gene Wilder.
Yeah. So, yeah. Anyways, I guess, should we give a description? Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, you got to give you give your description first, and then I'll read.
Yeah, so this wasn't necessarily, or this definitely wasn't an origin story. It was a Gene Wilder played Frederick Frankenstein and von Frankenstein, and he is the grandson of the original Dr. Frankenstein, and doesn't want anything to do with his family's past, but it ends up in, I guess, the will or something, goes back to Transylvania or wherever he is. Transylvania's Dracula. I don't know if it's Transylvania. Goes back to wherever
he goes to Transylvania.
Okay. And ends up resuming his grandfather's work after discovering his journals, and ends up essentially recreating, I guess, the entire story of Frankenstein, with a little more comedic twist, obviously, of resurrecting a zombie, a monster, and he ends up.
I think that's a good. That's a good summary.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't really know how to explain kind of the ending of it in a way where it just kind of goes a little off the rails. But yeah.
The description, according to what is up here on our television, is a young neurosurgeon inherits the castle of his grandfather, the famous Dr. Victor von Frankenstein. In the castle, he finds a funny hunchback, a pretty lab assistant, and the elderly housekeeper. Asterisk, I have something to say about that in a second. Young Frankenstein believes that the work of his grandfather was delusional, but when he discovers the books where the mad doctor described his reanimation experiment... ... TV cuts it off. Awkward.
We'll never know.
When he discovers these books, he gets excited about his research and decides to recreate it, more or less. Just quick side note on the fact that it says the elderly housekeeper, who is played by Cloris Leachman. She was 42 years old when this film was made.
Oh, man.
So apparently 42 is elderly. So just keep that in mind as 42 comes up in the next 10 years for us.
Mrs. Robinson was, what did you say, 36?
I think she was 35 when the movie was filmed.
Yeah. That was like the cougar.
True.
So, man, like...
Our perspective of age has really changed over the years.
We're on the cusp of being ancient all of a sudden.
And also back to the rating, according to the TV, the star rating is a 7.9.
And it's got a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes.
So...
I do find it interesting. Rotten Tomatoes is significantly higher than the star rating, and I wonder how much that takes into account, like the fact that Rotten Tomatoes was created long after this movie was released. So these are not any sort of like gut reactions or, here's how it was reviewed at the time, mixed with the ratings of here's how it was eventually perceived with the historical lens.
I have no idea where these actual star rating, like the star rating, is actually coming from. Where is that? What information is that based off of?
I don't know where the star rating comes from, but the Rotten Tomatoes is like how many overall reviews rate it positively versus negatively, and kind of rates it that way. So, but I think that kind of does skew some of the older movies, like the quote unquote classics, are going to be rated higher in Rotten Tomatoes because they are viewed as from the lens of being a classic. Whereas movies that were released after Rotten Tomatoes, IMDb, all those kind of were solidified, those are going to be more like a combination of, what are the reviews at the time versus, 5 years, 10 years down the road. How do we look back on them? And it kind of averages that out. So take that with that grain of salt, I guess, on your salted tomato.
Salted tomato. All right. Was the movie what you expected?
No, because like I said before, I thought it was the fact that the title is Young Frankenstein, I thought it was going to be kind of like a Young Sheldon type situation where it was going to be the origin story or something. Obviously, I knew it was Gene Wilder. I knew he wasn't going to be so young, but I just assumed it was going to be like how did he get into reanimation, or what sort of experiments did he run before he settled on creating Frankenstein's monster. So...
Yeah, I thought it was similar to what you said, and I don't know if that's because you said that beforehand. I don't actually think I've seen this now that I think about it. I was probably confusing it more with Dracula, and I might have seen bits and pieces of it before. I don't think I've never watched it all the way through now that I've watched it. But I do think the style of the film and the setting and all that stuff was definitely what I was expecting going into it.
I knew it was black and white, obviously.
Yeah.
Movies at the time were not all black and white. So I kind of expected it to be kind of that like really old style of like humor and jokes with a bit of like modern references into an old timey thing, and that's kind of the joke. The humor level is more what I expected. And I'll get to this in my notes. The crudeness of the humor was not what I expected given the PG rating.
Yes. Yeah. I have things to say about that too. We'll save that for a minute.
Yeah.
Let's go into how well did it age and could it be made today?
How well did it age? I think it aged mostly fine, other than the rating. It definitely wouldn't be PG today.
I think the setting of it has something to do with that too. It's not like it was shot in the 70s, it was shot in the 70s and made this, or like set in the 70s. It was shot in the 70s, made or set in like the 30s from the light Googling I did when we took a quick popcorn break. That I think because it was kind of set in that old timey black and white, you obviously know and it has the comedy bits to it too. That I think that helps it age. At one point
they're like
fine.
joking about Ovaltine, and obviously like I think was a much more of a anachronism type joke there, where it just was playing fun at that. But could it be made today? I have in my notes there that I think that if it were made today, I think that his fiance would have been played by Leslie Mann, and Frankenstein's monster would be played by Jason Segel.
I love it.
About the ending scene.
Love it.
The ending scene where they're like in bed, whatever, and she's going on, and he's like, I don't even know.
So does that make like Paul Rudd, Gene Wilder?
That's what I was trying to figure out, is who would have played him. I guess if you're going with that, either that or Seth Rogen.
I think Paul Rudd's better choice.
Yeah, but I think they could have really gone with like a different vibe with Seth Rogen.
For sure. And that kind of, I don't know, I'll get into it about the cast of this.
Again, I think Seth Rogen would have been a better Igor.
There it is. We're figuring it out. It's coming. We're just spitballing back and forth.
So in our remake, there's the
in the 2020s remake.
Yeah. Does that group have like a name? I mean, they were obviously in like knocked up and everything together, but I feel like a lot of the comedy troupes have like a name or something. But yeah, I feel like if they remade it with that group, it could be funny. Same vibe today.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see a 2020s remake. I mean, we're coming up on 50 years that. Let's do it, Hollywood.
Yeah.
All right. Were there any actors that went on to do bigger things?
Yes.
It was a big old stacked cast.
Yeah, I mean, besides the obvious stars in there, the Frankenstein's monster was played by Peter Boyle, who went on to do a whole lot of things. Most of what we know him for was like Everybody Loves Raymond and the Santa Claus. Santa Claus and Santa Claus 2, different characters. He played his boss in Santa Claus 1. He played Father Time in Santa Claus 2, and was he in 3 as well?
I think he passed away before 3.
Yeah. I was going to say, I feel like that's right.
I can't be 100% certain, but I'm pretty sure.
And also, Gene Hackman was in fact in this. When I was saying earlier that I had Gene Wilder confused with Gene Hackman, turns out Gene Hackman was in this as the blind man. Went on to much bigger things than playing some, comedic role in this movie.
Yeah. And I mean, Cloris Leachman's in this, and she's obviously very famous. But also, we kind of talked about during Blazing Saddles how, was the Mel Brooks, Gene Wilder, did you call it like an ensemble cast? Or like the
kind of like what I was saying
with Adam Sandler and Rob Schneider, like these groups that just like always make movies together. And there's Gene Wilder, and then Madeline Kahn comes on, and she was also in Blazing Saddles, and it was directed by Mel Brooks. That kind of seems like we've got at least like a small group that keeps going together.
I will say in Blazing Saddles, I thought that the executioner was the same character that played Igor in this, and it's not. But in that research, I found out that the Igor actor, with his like bulging eyes, it was like a thyroid condition that made him have that, and he just kind of like leaned into it. And apparently, a lot of women at the time found him very attractive, despite that.
Interesting.
I guess with the confidence.
I guess we researched different things about him mid-movie, because I found out that he died of a heart attack at the age of 48.
Yep, died young. Well, ancient apparently.
According to this, according to the description of this movie, he was elderly.
Old age of 48.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So, all right. Does the title fit the movie? Or did they say the title of the movie in the movie?
I don't think they did. I mean, obviously they said Frankenstein a lot, but I don't think they said Young Frankenstein.
I guess they said it in the description right here. Mm-hmm. I don't think they said. I'm thinking back at the description that I just read. I don't think they said it in the movie. Having read this description here, I guess I see it how it fits, but I think it very much to me seemed like it was some kind of like origin story type movie that I don't love. I mean, I feel like the title doesn't really describe it, but it does.
I think
but
it would
it
go
doesn't.
something like Frankenstein the Third or
The next Frankenstein, something better than that, but like
3 or like I don't know. I feel like it didn't quite fit it because it was misleading. In that you would view that as an origin story. But yeah, I don't think there's anything that would have fit it besides Frankenstein plus like something to denote that he was a descendant. Like almost like Bride of Chucky as like the sequel to the Chucky movies.
Oh man.
So what else do we have? What impact do you think the movie had on pop culture? I don't know if the movie itself really had a direct effect. I think it was just kind of another of the Mel Brooks movies. I think that it definitely more made fun of a previous culture than it was culturally like impacting culture itself.
Yeah. And I think if anything, like what I take like from a pop culture standpoint is more of Mel Brooks's style of comedy. And I have some notes on that in a minute, but I think that's more of its impact is, Mel Brooks like making his mark of this is who I am as a comedian and as a writer and a director and whatever. Not that this necessarily influenced other things, but
I feel more familiar with Mel Brooks more so than I feel cultured after watching it.
Yes. But is he not a pop culture?
True.
Depends on how you look at it.
Yeah.
And do you feel cultured after watching it?
That's what I was going to say. I feel more cultured in Mel Brooks than I do in like pop culture in general.
But I mean,
I don't think I'm going to go around like quoting it. I mean, if people say like, have you seen it? I obviously now can say that I have seen it.
I do feel cultured. Just, I feel like I've heard it before, like heard of this movie. Obviously more so recently in the most recent weeks since we just watched Blazing Saddle. I've heard about it more in the last few weeks than I have in my whole life, but I have heard it before to kind of have this in my wheelhouse of.
Plus, I feel like watching any black and white movie just kind of like, it's like a cheat code to make yourself feel more cultured.
That is true.
Like the time that I watched Nebraska and the movie happened, it was like made like 2010 or something, happened to be filmed in black and white. And I'm like, oh yes, this is very artsy. I'm very, very sophisticated now.
True. All right. Do you want to go first or do you want to go first on your notes?
You can go first.
Okay. I think you went first last week. All right. So just kind of jumping back, I had my Mel Brooks stuff at the beginning, and just appreciating what his style of comedy was. And I noticed that he kind of always seems to set his movies in a different time period. So this was shot in the 70s and this was like supposedly set in like the 30s and Blazing Saddles was probably somewhere in the 1800s. Spaceballs was in the future. That like his style of comedy is taking you out of reality into like out of current times into some other time and kind of and I mean, and it's all like satire, making fun of the Wild West, making fun of the Frankenstein, like making fun of Star Wars, Star Trek, like
taking you to a different time, but also having direct references to the time at the time, like the reference to like Ovaltine in this and like the Winnebago in Spaceballs. It very much felt like it's a good like hybrid of it's like 90% that time period, but like 10% is some references to when he made the movie.
Yeah, and I, obviously. It's not the 70s or the 80s anymore, so those references are outdated. But I think that's such a cool style of comedy. It's not something that you see a whole lot of. We're taking you out of the present, but I'm still going to tie in a little bit of current stuff that's going on, and it just seems like a very unique perspective on comedy and film style.
Yeah, definitely.
I appreciate it more now than I
like almost
before.
like a time capsule within a time capsule.
Love that. That is exactly it.
Write that down in the show notes.
My next note is Gene Wilder. He has a look, let me tell you. The first thing I noticed was his makeup. in this movie. He had some eyeliner and some serious mascara. Mascara game very strong on Gene Wilder. I could not unsee it. I don't know if that's something that he has in all of his movies or if I just noticed it more because of the black and white and I felt like there was a lot more like close-ups on his face in this, but he was definitely wearing a lot of eye makeup in this movie. And
I feel like he has like a sorrow like to his acting and his comedy. I don't know. There's something about him where I almost feel like he looks unhappy a lot of times when he's acting and like the jokes. There's like almost like a sadness to things. Especially, the first big thing I saw him in was Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and I don't know. He just seems like a guy who's like laughing so he doesn't cry in a lot of things that he does.
There's something that he reminds me of that I'm gonna have to do research because I can't think of it off the top of my head. But I do think he has like almost like, I hate to say feminine features, but like feminine expressions or like just very like gentle expressions. And his eyes, I feel like, are very feminine.
Very soft.
And I don't know if I say that because he was wearing mascara in this.
That's going to heavily influence that.
But I noticed it in Blazing Saddles and when
Especially
I think on
his eyes to
Willy
Eeyore's
Wonka.
eyes.
That's not a fair
The
comparison.
juxtaposition there, I think, really influenced it.
And then also continuing on his looks for a hot second, his comb over. Man, his part was like just above his ear and just going all the way over his head. Plus, he really, really needed some kind of product in his hair. It looked so dry and frizzy. And I know that was probably leaning a little bit more into the like mad scientist vibe.
I think it was definitely a mad scientist vibe.
But I just really wanted to just put a little bit of conditioner in his hair.
I think some of the shots, they really wanted him to look kind of crazy.
And it got more extreme towards the end. But even at the beginning, I was like, ooh, just like little something here and there. And then I think we both have notes on this, but the PG rating. So we like made a point of looking at PG before, like looking at the rating and paying attention to that before we even started. And within the first like 5 minutes, they're saying son of a bitch, bastard.
Yeah, they say son of a bitch, I think a couple times there. A lot of really just crude humor.
Oh yeah.
In the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, throughout the whole thing, so a lot of sexual.
And then it got real sexual at the end.
Yeah.
In the beginning, when they were some of the cussing, I was like thinking to myself, like watching it with like we'll say 7-year-old. I feel like 7-year-olds old is probably a good like starting to bridge into PG movies, obviously.
And PG stands for parental guidance.
Yeah.
But like you're supposed to watch it with somebody that's older.
I can watch it and be like, explain later. Be like, okay, those are some funny words. We're not going to go and say them all the time. Understand what those words mean. But then it got to the point where I'm like, it just feels like this should have been PG-13. At least.
Oh yeah, especially all the like sexual references and jokes like that. And I mean, I thought they were funny, but I would not want my younger, like my elementary aged child.
Yeah, not that we're like super
that.
like protective of anything that our kids watch, but I feel like I couldn't make the case for this being a PG movie. It just felt like PG-13 would be a bit more capable of handling most of the humor there,
for sure,
or even appreciating the humor there. Obviously, in a lot of kids' movies, I've found now watching it with our own kids, is that there's a lot of jokes that are a little more adult
over the heads of the kids.
Like go way over the heads, and you watch it like 15 years later, and like, oh my God, I can't believe they were joking about that. This was very much in your face, and I feel like even as a 7-year-old, you would be like, I am embarrassed to watch this with my parents.
For sure. Yeah. So again, like we kind of talked about last week, it'll be interesting to pay attention to these ratings and kind of see how they compare to the ratings of things today. And then I made a note about Cross Eyes because I guess it was also Blazing Saddles with the cross. No, it was The Jerk last week with his OptiGrab.
Yes.
That it was just something about the 70s and the 80s where they really thought the Cross Eyes joke was really funny. And the guy, the experiment in the classroom.
And quicksand.
Yeah.
The easy shortcuts to humor there.
Again, and I worried a lot about cross eyes in my life. My eyes were going to start to cross forever. And I understand why, because it was apparently referenced in a lot of different movies. Also, like the cross eyes was in the classroom in his like science classroom in the beginning of the movie, college classroom. And I was kind of impressed by the diversity in the class. There was a handful. I mean, I guess this was set in the 30s, supposedly-ish, that there was a whole bunch of women in there, which I don't think of in the 1930s, there being a bunch of women in a like neuroscience class.
Yeah.
There was also...
Unless they were like calling them the nurses, I feel like would have been more what they would have been
True.
cast into at that time.
There's also a handful of Black people, and there was a Black woman in there too, which I feel like that was not something that would have been very super common in the 30s, as well as at least one Asian man. I started to notice it towards the end, but just I think the black and white setting, and
it's a bit more of like the late 70s, or I guess mid 70s, seeping into the quote unquote 30s timeline, or when that would have been. Because I think at the time it definitely would not have been happening.
And even in the 70s, though, I feel like it's still a little bit of a stretch. That
I think they were pushing the envelope, obviously, with a movie earlier that year with Blazing Saddles. That I think that Mel Brooks was just pushing the envelope.
Good on you, Mel Brooks.
Yeah.
And then I had a note about Madeline Kahn, who was the singer in Blazing Saddles, and the like type of cast. And I just was not expecting to see her again. And that was it was nice to have had. I feel like that was the first time I've appreciated that we were watching these movies, and it's like, oh well, like my knowledge of this movie has being built on with this movie, and just kind of seeing like the crossover of all those things has been really cool. And then to get a little bit into the videography, cinematography situation, some of the transitions in this movie felt very much like I'm working in iMovie, like circa like middle high school, trying to make some kind of cool artsy,
I was gonna say Windows Movie Maker,
like artsy slideshow of me and my friends, or like my like soccer team for the year, and I put the like spinning transition to go to the next clip, or there's one that was like a diamond shape that then like faded out, and it just felt like all the like very stereotypical video editing movie clip picture transitions.
I didn't focus on that as much, but I did notice that it felt like it might have been on purpose, because I started paying attention while they were in the castle. Is that it felt like a lot of the focal lengths in the field of view felt very narrow and like claustrophobic almost. That I don't know if it was just that's more what cameras, especially like when you're in a tight place, kind of were forced into, was a very narrow field of view. But it felt like I was very much like on top of them for a lot of it, unless they were like outside doing the scene like in the graveyard or something. It felt like they felt very close to all of the action. Yeah. I don't know if that was on purpose or not.
I did, in my quick search trying to figure out what year it was like really set in, it seems like Mel Brooks was trying to copy the style of cinematography of the 30s. So my knowledge of 1930s movies is probably non-existent. I don't think I've ever watched a movie that's that old, but I wonder if that plays into that.
I did want, and I made a note in mind that I wish I'd recently watched the original, like Frankenstein.
Right. I thought the same thing.
Because I wonder how much of these were direct recreations of the scenes, and I think probably a lot of it. That I wonder if we would have seen a lot more similarity in the shooting style and the the cinematography, the focal lengths, field of view, and all that. I wonder if they were trying to just mimic that style.
Yeah,
1930s.
I feel like they really were, and so I'm definitely adding the original Frankenstein to our list, because I think that will be a fun callback to this whenever we get to it. Probably closer to October would be my guess. Would be to watch it at that spooky season, right?
Call that one the old Frankenstein.
True. And then I also said, like, feels like it was shot in a different style from the 1970s. And that was before I looked up that he apparently was very intentional with like how he was doing his shots and the color balance and all that kind of stuff. I will probably do a little bit more reading up on that before next week, but and that's why I feel like I really am enjoying doing this podcast, is I'm paying attention to a lot more stuff like that. And I think I would have just been like, oh, I'm watching this movie. I don't know that I would have really thought about like, oh, how did they shoot this? Or like, was this on purpose? And just thinking a little bit more of the creative side of how the movie was shot, as opposed to just the like writing of the movie, which I think is what you think of more.
It's one of those things I noticed those aspects, and I'm like, I ask myself, like, is it because they're trying to like make it feel more claustrophobic? Is it because they're trying to recreate like that style? Is it because that's the equipment they had at the time? Like, was there a reason behind a lot of it? Sometimes you watch a movie and you don't realize that you were feeling this like feeling of claustrophobia, or you were feeling this feeling of like feeling like small, minuscule because of the way it was shot, and it was done deliberately to give you that feeling, and that's like really, really cool. Yeah. But I also wonder how much of that is thought of consistently, especially in something like a comedy that's trying to give an old nostalgic, or not nostalgic, but like or old timey vibe.
Yeah, I think, again, it'll be interesting to just continue to watch more movies and pay attention to this stuff and kind of see how all of that stuff changes over the times.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fake smoke in this movie, like around the train scene and in the lab. And I mean, obviously, I mean, it was definitely like a satire, but I mean, it was very noticeable and I thought it was funny, but just quick little note about that. Then a note about the sedative that they put into Frankenstein when he was under the net, and she just stabbed it in him and just didn't plunge it at all. And then she picks it out and it's like spewing everywhere and just very funny. Yeah. It was, and I think it was just those like little comedy things that were very funny.
It all, and then she pulls it and I see just spray it.
And I feel like that was just like the style of all the jokes in this was just these little things that are really dumb, but that just made you laugh.
Yeah.
And also I thought the whole let's present Frankenstein in front of a theater full of people thing was definitely a 1930s thing. But then just a note about like throwing things at performers and why that just felt like it was acceptable.
People bring cabbage to movies.
And I made a note about specifically that they threw produce at people. Like is food not like something that you're worried about just like wasting on bad performers that you're going to just throw it at people?
Bring like bad produce, like if it was gone bad, maybe.
I mean, isn't that why it's called Rotten Tomatoes?
But do you like want to bring that to like the movie and be like sitting with it? Like you're watching a movie and you're like, well, I've got this really like old, nasty smelling cabbage in my lap, but like in the off chance that they're not doing really well, I'm going to chuck it. But if they're doing well, like what do you do? Do you like leave it there? Do you bring it home with you? Do you like take it outside and find
Very
a trash
true.
can
I didn't even think that you'd have to sit with it the whole time. But have we just like evolved more of us as a society that we don't bring our old produce to, I guess we're not going to as many live shows, but I mean, can you imagine someone going to Hamilton and not liking it? And just like chucking their like bad lettuce.
Yeah, you don't bring lettuce.
I guess true, throwing beer. But I felt like that was such something like obviously we don't go to as many like live shows anymore, but it's something that you hear.
Go to the theater.
Yeah, we're not theater people. That's like pretty much it. I had a couple other things, but yeah.
Yeah. So for my notes, I talked about it being like black and white and just that being an interesting choice there. Obviously, it was to kind of throw back to the original Frankenstein movie.
I think it fit it though.
Obviously, it's an older movie, so I know that was not like typical for the time. I can see a lot of people thinking like, oh, Young Frankenstein, it's a black and white movie. It must be like really, really old, but it's clearly making fun of that. The iconic like dramatic sound, like the dramatic chipmunk, the dun 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 that they did several times. At first I was like, oh, is that like what this is originally from or something? Given that this movie is a little older, but the fact that they played it so many times, it felt like they were overdoing it, especially in the beginning for that over the top dramatic sound, just to kind of make that funny. We talked about the cussing, the crude humor, and the sex scene, which I feel like the sex scene was very much more like a rapey scene. It would not be as
the Frankenstein and the fiance,
or
them on the
platform.
Yeah,
the platform I think was more just like a affair in the lab type thing. But I think the taking her to a cave and then like showing her his gigantic dong or something, and I think that was a bit more like crude, especially for the fact that
I just can't get over that. Those things that it was rated PG, like definitely would not fly today. I mean, like, you know, the types of parents that are around today.
Nowadays, they'll mark something like probably like PG-13 just because they were smoking cigarettes in it. There's no way this would continue to have that
Absolutely
rating. But wild times. I noted that I wished that I had watched the original first, just to have that
appreciate it.
Comparison.
And we kind of said the same thing with Blazing Saddles before. Of like, I wish we'd watched more Westerns beforehand to appreciate it. But at the same time, like now we have these.
We're watching these, yeah.
We have these to appreciate that when we do watch like the original Frankenstein or a traditional Western type movie, that we can see where, oh, like that's where this came from, or that's why they were making fun of this.
And I imagine that we'll have the awareness to realize as we watch movies that are older than these to be like, these weren't influenced by Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein. Blazing Saddles were making fun of this.
Very true.
Mentioned Peter Boyle and Igor, actor. Talked about that we needed a rubric for our ratings. I did really enjoy the subtle jokes. It didn't feel like a lot of these jokes were like in your face or over the top. Some of them, you laughed at a couple of them that I honestly I didn't pick up on until after you laughed, that they were like very much like subtle, and also the continuity of some of the jokes was good too. Like the dart scene where you're throwing the darts and they come out and you just see it all in the tires of the car.
And the every time he said the elderly housekeeper's name, that the horses would freak out. And I think that's why I appreciate it so much, is it was not like, oh, I'm obviously trying to make you laugh, like I'm really being obnoxious. It was just very light. In your
face ones where like the first time you hear it, you're like, that was, really forced, like a dramatic moment. And then you're like, oh, that was kind of funny. Oh, that was kind of weird. And then like, as it keeps going throughout the movie, and there was one time later when they say, and you hear the horses way in the background, like it got funny. It was done very well. It didn't feel like I got sick of that joke by the end.
Yeah. I very much appreciated the comedy in this. It was not over the top, like crude type of humor. It was just very like, I don't know that I would have used the word subtle to describe it until you said it, but it was just like, obviously it's making fun of another movie.
Yeah.
But
some jokes I feel like in comedies nowadays, they're very much in your face. Like you know that they're really trying really hard to make this funny, and it didn't.
It feels like there was a lot more thought behind a lot of these jokes, and they were like the groundwork was laid beforehand for some of them, and it was just like, I did all of this, and then I'm going to put this joke in here because we've done all this work ahead of time to set this up, like his hunchback moving sides, and just like some of those little things I thought was really, really good.
Yeah. And the last note that I have is the fact that there was another musical number in this.
As soon as I started singing, I was like, oh, here we go.
Like, again, it's like just one musical number, not two fours, not over the top, doesn't go on far too long. And again,
yeah, I appreciated that it was only the one.
Felt like, I don't know, like a little bit different vibe, and you just really don't see that as much anymore.
And I think this one, it was not like they were in the theater. So they were kind of in a situation where it felt natural. It's not like they were in the middle of like the football field and they were feeling their emotions and they were just going to start singing like some kind of type thing. I wasn't going to go there, but like a little bit.
Yeah, it felt more like a Family Guy type situation where in the middle of an episode they like launch into like this musical number and it goes over the top, but then like it just kind of cuts back to where it was afterwards. But this didn't feel as out of place given the fact that they were obviously in a theater to show off this performance. And it's well done. And I'm not going to change my rating after discussing it now. I still just don't think I would. I'll change my rating. We're going to go...
Changing it already.
We're going to go 5.7.
Okay. I respect that.
Yeah.
I think
I did enjoy some of the subtle jokes. And I think it's also a movie that if I watch it like 3, 4, 18 times, it'll get funnier.
Yeah.
I'll appreciate the jokes at least.
I mean, I will say I believe we're getting out of the 70s next week and doing like different style where... I mean, we talked about how we might in the future intentionally choose or make like not seasons, but like little like groups of movies for a couple weeks in a row and be intentional about this. And this we did not do on purpose. I'm glad we did it. And I feel like there is a lot of value in watching a lot of similar style movies close together. But I can say I'm kind of over this era right now, and I need a little bit of a break.
Yeah, just a little break. So maybe we'll go with something less of a comedy for a little bit. I think maybe like a drama or something maybe in like the 80s, early 90s time frame.
I'd like to get a little closer to the present.
Yeah.
And I think just for contrast too, of just a completely different style of movie. Yeah. But I will say, like, I definitely appreciated this one the most of the last couple of weeks. And I mean, with my ratings, like I appreciate, like last week, I didn't love the movie itself, but I appreciate that it was the beginning of Steve Martin's career. And like, I love Steve Martin, and just seeing like, oh, that's like, this is where he started. And like, I can see how he kind of built on this as he got bigger. And having already watched a Mel Brooks movie and, seeing those connections, and just, I'm feeling a lot more of the culture night, the culture part of it. And I did laugh a lot. I thought it was very funny. So I laughed the most the last couple of weeks.
I think you're also tired because I feel like you were giggling a lot more in this, whereas I was like, how much more is left in this?
It has been a week. These babies are killing me and not been sleeping as much as I have been. But it's okay. We'll be more well rested next week. Hopefully. Did I just jinx us?
Yeah.
We are notorious for jinxing ourselves.
Sleep regression coming up.
So hopefully we'll be more well rested next week. You can tell we're so tired. Oh man. And yeah, I'm ready to come back and to do something new. I'm
change up the theme.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll switch it up a little bit, but that was episode 6.
Cheers.
And cheers one more time to close this out.
Catch you next week.
Bye.